Okay. Hello, everybody. So this is our welcome to the fourth year curriculum for NCLII, and you guys are the first cohort, and many of you are in your last year of doc study, so congratulations for making it this far. Um, Today's webinar is focused on how to get and be successful in your first job, and you can see that I'm the one leading it. Chris, can you hear me? Can someone just type and let me know that you can actually hear me? That would be helpful. Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so here we go. So the overview of today's meeting is to provide you with an overview or a preview of the Year 4 curriculum, which many of you have not seen, and then to focus more deeply on today's focus, which is where do you find job postings and how do you get started preparing your CV and cover letter. And we also are going to provide an overview of the 3 examples that I shared yesterday. And then I'm going to give you just a little preview. I'm kind of getting you ready for some of the next parts of the curriculum, thinking about what questions should you be prepared to answer during job interviews. And then we'll open it up to questions. So here is the preview of the Year 4 curriculum. And I do want to thank Sam Gessel and Caitlin Majika for giving us input and for preparing the graphic that you're about to see. So the NCLII Curriculum Committee came up with a lot of ideas of what we wanted to do with you this semester, and Sam and Caitlin were nice enough to make it organized and pretty, so thank you. So this, starting with this summer, and I guess really we're now into early fall, we're going to have 3 different webinars. And so this is the first one. And in this first one, we're going to be talking about how to figure out where the job postings are, and then to start giving you some guidance on developing your CV and writing your first cover letter. And we're going to give you a rubric that you can use so that your advisor can provide you with written feedback on those examples. And we are going to ask that all of you prepare a CV and cover letter, even if you are currently thinking that you're going to be in the 5th year of you're going to go into a 5th year, because we think this will be a good activity for you. You can see that the next webinar is going to be focused on getting ready for initial interviews. So phone interviews and Skype interviews. Both of those are getting to be more and more popular, and in all honesty, I think they're probably one of the more challenging aspects of the job hunt. So, Catherine, can you remind me who's doing those 2? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Terrell, I see you're out there. If you can type in the text box who's doing those, I would appreciate it. We have people signed up for it, and I just can't remember who's doing it right now. And then we're going to do a webinar of getting you ready for on-campus visits. And in that, we're going to have you start thinking about what your 1-year plan and your 5-year plan is going to look like, and then give you some more ins and outs of job talks and the interview, and kind of thinking about what that's actually going to look like. And Terrell says that in September, it's going to be Sharon Vaughn and Marcia Barnes. And I believe that's the initial interviews. And then October is still to be determined. So if you have an NCLII faculty member that you think is brilliant and you would love to hear them talk to you about getting ready for on-campus visits, please send me an email. Okay, you can see at the fall meeting, for you guys, we're really going to focus a lot on getting you ready for your job. So there are going to be some panels that are focused on interviewing, where people are going to give you an overview of what are the experiences of this interview process, what does it look like, what should you expect, a little more deep into questions to ask. And then I think this is a good component, is thinking about how do you answer those hard questions, or even the questions that people are not supposed to ask. For example, are you planning on having a baby this year? Many of those things actually do get asked, even though they're not supposed to, and so we'll give you some tips on handling those. There's going to be some in-person practice at the fall meeting with doing miniature job talks, and then they have actually, Sarah Powell has been leading the effort of leading that meeting, and you're actually going to get some practice doing mini interviews as well, which I think is going to be really helpful. There is going to be a highlight reel of the curriculum developed across the year 3. Thank you all for your really hard work on those courses. The ones that I've seen so far look absolutely amazing, and so I'm really impressed with you on that. And then there's a plan for a job dinner So for whenever you are forced to go eat with people on the job interview, how do you kind of have small talk, but also highlight your successes and what you want to do in the job? And so we'll practice that a little. Then in the winter, we're going to have a couple more webinars focused on job offers. So what goes into that offer, what's a startup package, what can you negotiate for, how do you deal with having multiple offers at the same time, thinking about small scale grants. So how can you get started successfully with your research and maybe even improving your teaching with things that are available before you get a very large grant. And then some tips for collaboration with thinking of working with schools, organizations, and leadership. In the spring and summer, we're going to have a couple more panels. So some recent grads talking to us about work-life balance, how to say no. That's probably the most important thing for you to learn in your first years out the door, is saying no to things. And then just transitioning into that new job, navigating procedures, different supports and mentoring, thinking about teaching and service. So get some experience from different people, but also figuring out how to put it in its appropriate box. And then hopefully at the next meeting, we'll have some in-person practice with writing a small grant or a training grant and planning out your first year of writing. And I missed the panel, the later experiences panel, thinking about renegotiating if you are in that position, and then handling evaluations and promotions. So as you can see, we really hope that this year of the curriculum is focused on helping you get the job you want and then helping you be successful as you're moving into that job. And many of you, when we were asking ideas for this fourth year curriculum, these are the things that you requested. So hopefully you will find this to be pretty helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the main content of today's webinar. So I'm going to first of all say many, many thanks to my colleague and friend, Michael Solis, who's an assistant professor at the University of California, Riverside, because he shared the majority of the following slides with me, and I didn't have to make them all. So I appreciate his help here. So I think this was kind of an interesting way to get us started. So there's Michael up there at the right. So Michael applied for jobs. Can you see the year? It's covered by my buttons.
2013.
In 2013, he was a go-getter and applied for 23 positions. He completed 14 Skype or phone interviews. He was invited for 12 campus interviews, and he completed 7 of those. And he was offered 2 positions, and he took his first position at the University of Virginia. You can see my experience was a little bit different. I was applying in 2007. I applied for only 4 positions. I did 0 Skype or phone interviews. That was back before those things were actually occurring. And I was invited for 3 campus interviews. I completed all 3, and I was offered 2 positions. And you can see that's my angry faculty photo from my first year on the job. Okay, so the point of the slide is just to show you that there's a huge range of the number of jobs that you'll be applying for. I think 23 is really on the high end. I would say I think most people are currently applying for maybe 6 to 8. And I do think that the Skype and phone interviews are becoming almost common on every single one of those. And they are really the thing you need to practice for the most because they're quite awkward. And then you can see that even though Michael went through all of that work, we both were offered the same number of positions and took one job. Okay, so some of you have been asking, where do you find job ads? So usually you're going to start following job postings around August the 1st for positions to start the following year. This year, actually, several job postings came out a little bit earlier. Most of the time, the universities that are most organized are going to get their jobs out the first. And what they're trying to do is hopefully find the highest quality candidates and get them to commit to coming to their university before the other universities catch up and get their jobs out at. So it is usually a positive sign if a university has an early job ad because it means that they kind of have their act together. I will also say that often happens a lot of times when a job didn't fill the first year. And so these people, they have the ad approved, they have everything ready to go, and so they can just get it posted the second year. So oftentimes you'll see a job that was there last year and then it comes out again. And that just means that the position wasn't filled. And that's actually relatively common for people not to fill the position in the first year. So job postings are listed in the Chronicle of Higher Ed on their website. If you haven't done so, you really should go to the Chronicle of Higher Ed and get added to their listserv. You can specify the type of job that you want or the ads you want, like special ed, and you'll get very frequent updates. And I will say, I think almost every university places their job ads there. If you're not signed up to SpedPro, that's another place that sends a lot of jobs. And if you aren't on SpedPro and you would like to be, send me an email and I can get you connected to that. Simplyhired.com is one that Michael recommends, and I'm actually not familiar with it, but he says that you can sign up for email alerts from there as well. And then PCRC, the Pacific Coast Research Conference that most of you know about, we also send frequent job postings through that ad, and they're almost all special ed focused. So if you haven't signed up for the PCRC email list, you can follow the link that is here. And I'm assuming we will be getting this PowerPoint to you either by email or putting it in Moodle, and Terrell will probably follow up with that. So you'll be able to sign up for that. But also just be very vocal, talking to your advisor and other faculty in your department. Everyone should know that you are applying for jobs, and you should ask everyone if they have heard of anything. The deadlines for applications range from about September 15th to January 15th. I would say a majority of schools try to have the job ad due before the fall semester is over so that they can start inviting people. Again, the earlier they can invite you in the spring semester, the more likely they are to get the top quality candidates. So they're really trying to, I think we're starting to see more and more people actually schedule on-campus visits at the end of fall, but a majority are still in the spring. You need to identify a strategy for determining which jobs to apply for. So you really need to have some clear thoughts about whether, one, what type of job do you want? Do you want a research one? Do you want a teaching institution? Do you want to work outside of academia? Are you happy with any of those? Then you need to also think about geographic location. Are there certain places in the country that you simply would not move no matter what type of job was there? Or perhaps your spouse would not move there? And thinking about how many jobs you're willing to go for. Are you in the middle of a really complicated dissertation, so you're only going to go to the top jobs? Many times doc students will identify kind of only the top job, like only apply for like their dream R1 jobs if they have the opportunity to like stick around for another year as a postdoc or something like that. So you need to kind of think about what you're prioritizing, and we can talk about that at the end in the discussion. Beth has a question about ideas for non-faculty job search sites. I will say, Beth, that in the Chronicle, they also do have non-faculty job search sites there. And through PCRC, we will, actually all of them, Chronicle, SpedPro, and PCRC, we do send both faculty and non-faculty jobs. So I think all of those are good resources. I can't think of another one. If anybody on the call has an idea of other websites for non-faculty job search sites, if you'll type it in the search box, I'll tell Beth. So you need to identify both junior and senior colleagues to assist you and serve as a sounding board throughout the process. So, a lot of the times that, the things like one of the example that I showed my comparison of my search versus Michael's search is even my search done in 2007 is now old. Things are done differently and there's some different timing. So it's good to talk to senior people a lot about negotiating and expectations, but it's also good to talk about some more recent graduates just to see if any things are changing. And then you need to start putting together your application materials. Okay, so what are all the materials that are needed for the job search? So there are different types of material that are necessary. So everyone is going to ask for a cover letter. Everyone's going to ask for a curriculum vitae. They'll usually ask for 3 to 5 either names of references or reference letters. I think for most jobs, for brand new assistant professors, they typically do ask for the letters, but I've seen a few ads this year where they're just asking for names. So that might be happening. They often want 3, maybe up to 6 writing samples. And it's really going to be useful for you to organize a really good record keeping system of which job wants which things have you sent in, which places have confirmed that they received what you wanted. or what they wanted. So you're going to need to be quite organized about this. You'll see at the top that there are two other things that are sometimes requested, and that's a research plan and a teaching philosophy. So the research plan is really your 3 to 5 year plan of what in the world do you plan to do once you get here. And then your teaching philosophy can sometimes be a reflection on what do you think your role is in preparing teachers, how do you approach class, what are your theories of adult learning. And sometimes those are requested as separate documents. If they're not, some elements of those should be in your cover letter. If they are requested as separate documents, you don't necessarily need to overlap the material, but in that cover letter, you would refer to, I go deeper into my plans for the next 5 years of research in my research plan that is attached. And so those are kind of the common things that are looked for. Okay, so how do you begin writing that cover letter? Well, the first thing to do is to read the job description very carefully and make sure that your cover letter provides information on all of the elements that are requested in the job description. And I think it's also useful to organize your cover letter the way that the job ad is organized. So in a sense, the job ad is structured telling you what they think is most important. So the things that they list first, so for example, if they start off really hitting on your teaching interest, that is what they are really interested in. They start off talking about the needs for research, that's what they're interested in. So follow the letter as a guide and think about ways to highlight your qualifications with information that's outside of your vita. And we'll talk a little more about that in a second. What was I going to say here? Cover letter. I can't remember what I was thinking. Oh, I will also say sometimes people ask the question of, well, do I have to be 100% aligned with the job ad to even apply? And for that, I would say not necessarily. So if there's a place, like say you really want to move to Seattle and University of Washington has a job that you're kind of aligned to, but not perfectly, I would probably still apply. And the reason I would say that is because in my experience, most search committees have a job ad that's relatively clear and that is actually what they're looking for. But sometimes the job ad reflects what some of the people on the committee want and not necessarily everyone. And so I've definitely been on searches where the job ad was looking for a person with, specific expertise in early reading, and we actually hired someone with different expertise because they were the strongest candidate. So it doesn't hurt to apply for a job, even if you're not a perfect match with the cover letter. And sometimes you can actually contact the search chair and say, I'm really interested in your position. I'm not sure if I'm totally aligned. And oftentimes they will give you a feeling of, no, we definitely are only hiring someone that perfectly matches it, or you sound like a good candidate. Go ahead and submit. Okay, so for the elements of the cover letter, you need an introduction, so kind of who you are, who was your advisor, what was your dissertation study, and what are your research interests. You need to outline your professional goals and describe really how they align with the position. A summary of any pertinent experiences that you have, including any awards or acknowledgements, trainings you've participated in. So if any of you have gone to any of the IES institutes, those are really nice to have on there. Your research experience, grant writing experience, and teaching experience. And then as you close your letter, outline specifically how you meet the qualifications for the position. So the letter should make it very, very clear that you're qualified for the job, that you are enthusiastic about the job. And I've definitely read cover letters that have all of A, but 0 of B, and that person did not get an interview. So enthusiasm is important. And then it's also important to make clear, particularly at research institutions, that you have an ambitious yet realistic plan for how you're going to contribute to the department and expand your research line. So an example of not meeting C would be to say, hi, I'm going to be a first-year faculty and I intend to get 3 IES grants in my first year. That's highly ambitious, but it's absolutely unrealistic. And whenever you see job ads like that, it is really a red flag, or cover letters like that, it's a red flag that the person doesn't quite have an awareness of how this all actually works. So make sure that things are realistic. Okay, so your curriculum vitae should have some of the following things on it. So the education, the degrees that you've acquired and where they're from and the dates, who your current employer or previous employers have been. I think it's really important to highlight your teaching experience in special ed, since um, many many universities hiring faculty for teaching programs want to see good teaching experience, and your teaching certifications, publications, of course, grant applications. If you've had the opportunity to submit any of those before, as a student, those are good to list. Presentations you've done, research experience. And it can be helpful, if you've moved up in your role as a doc student from just someone who did assessments in your beginning year to a project coordinator or something in the end, it's helpful to kind of elaborate on what your role was and give a little clarity of exactly how much responsibility you have so that they can see that you moved up over the course of your program. Any university teaching experience is great to note. Any other teaching experience, you can include consulting on there, awards, any service that you've done at any level, your certifications, previous employers, and then any affiliations. So conferences that you go to, organizations that you're a member of, like CEC, AERA. It's good to know those because that kind of helps them understand a little more of what probably your philosophical background is. So for the research plan, a lot of applications really want to see, where do you plan on going in 3, maybe 5 years? So you need to provide an introduction, a summary of your methodological background. So what are the things that you know how to do? A summary of your empirical background. So I guess it's also what kind of studies that you're able to do. So single case design, group design, maybe you've done both of them, maybe you've done qualitative, descriptive. So help people understand how well-rounded you are. And then think about your projected lines of research and plan for each year. So kind of detailing like, okay, here are the 2 or 3 lines of research that I'm really the most interested in. Here is how I plan to take what I've currently done to the next level. So they want to be able to see that you're thinking, whenever I hit the ground running, I already have data that I collected as part of something at the university that I'm going to be writing that up. I'm going to be doing a literature review that's pretty feasible to do with no money to extend the line of research in this way. I'm also going to apply for internal funding or use my startup funds to conduct this one or two small studies that would be pilot data for a larger grant. And so if you can really walk through, I know what I'm going to do when I hit the ground running with little money, and I know how I'm going to take that to do larger projects that are more impactful. That kind of plan makes it really clear that you have your head on your shoulders, that you know where you're going, and that it's ambitious yet realistic. In terms of your teaching philosophy, you would probably provide an introduction, kind of give a little bit of your history of being in education, where you came from. I found that most of the job interviews I went on, and often when I've interviewed people as part of a search committee, we really want to hear that the people being interviewed have been in the classroom somehow, that they have a really good connection to students with disabilities. And I think this is most critical in our field of special ed, because it's really challenging to become a teacher prep person if you don't have an understanding of how actual schools work. So really highlighting that you understand that is useful. And then describe any of your teaching experience at the university level. And oftentimes, many of you, depending on which university you're at, you may not have had very many opportunities to provide, like to actually be an instructor of a college class. You may have only got to TA one time. So in teaching experience, to broaden that out, I think it's useful to also include any time that if you were training RAs on a research project and you were training them how to do an intervention, or you've done some consulting, or you've worked with schools, all of those things, you have to use the same skill set to do those, so those can count under your teaching experience. You would need to describe what you believe leads to effective teaching. So how do you kind of think about your role and how you're going to interact with future teachers to prepare them? What are the teaching methods you use? So do you do a lot of lecture only? Do you do a lot of activities? Do you do the flipped classroom style? how do you integrate technology? And actually the technology is one that more and more people are really wanting to see how you integrate technology. How do you address the needs of diverse learners? What's your philosophy for teaching college? Again, what is your role? And then a description of kind of what courses do you think you're qualified to teach? And so many universities are trying to fill an opening in a specific class. And so it is really helpful for you to kind of indicate that you have expertise in certain areas so that they can kind of understand how you meet their needs. Okay, for writing samples and references. So writing samples, submit your best writing samples. So the ones where you are highest up in the authorship order, preferably at least several first authors if those are available. And then you want the ones from the highest quality journals. Universities typically want about 3. I've seen as many as 6. And for those, some of you may not have peer-reviewed publications, or you may not have very many of them. So think of the products that you've done in your program, like your major area paper or your dissertation. Those can be submitted as well. I think the peer-reviewed journals are looked upon a little more strongly, but you definitely, I think it would be better to, let's say that you have 3 papers that you're on and you're author 4, 5, and 6 on each of those. It would be good to include something that's not a peer-reviewed publication that you're actually the lead author on. Because if you're just one of the trailing authors on everything you submit, that may be a little concerning because they're not sure that you actually contributed a lot to that. And if you do submit something where you're a low author ordership, somewhere in your cover letter, you probably want to indicate like what your role was. So, I led the analysis and I drafted the discussion or something like that. And so, let's see, someone asked, is it better to have a higher author or a better journal? Ooh, that's good. It really is a mix. It's nice to, I would probably say higher author would be, like if I was going to do 3, I would do 2 where I was the higher author and 1 in a good journal. Because this is really about trying to evaluate your skill as an author and a writer. And so if you're a really low level writer, I'm not too certain that you actually did a lot on that. So I think the high author would be a priority, but then if you have 1 super awesome journal, I would also put that in there just because it indicates that you've at least been involved with a team that can hit those high journals. And then someone asked, can you submit something that is under review? And absolutely. So anything that you've written is fair game. And as you'll see whenever we get to the examples, you'll see what I had to submit whenever I was interviewing. Should it all be research-focused manuscripts? What about practitioner pieces? So again, it kind of depends on the job. If you're looking for a really top R1, I would go for all research articles. If the job ad itself wants you to put in a separate statement for teaching, they indicate in the ad that you're going to be modeling teaching when you get there, then I would put a practitioner piece in there as well. So the hardcore R1s are probably going to have very little reference to what they want in terms of teaching in their ad. And if that's the case, then I wouldn't submit a practitioner-focused manuscript. For references, usually they ask for about 3. I'm seeing some are starting to go up to 5 or 6. And so you want to ask for references from the people who know you the best, but also the biggest names that you know. So both of those things are important, and you probably need to balance them out somewhat. But a letter from, Doug Fuchs is going to have more weight than a letter from someone who just started as a professor last year. So name recognition is valuable in this field. And so I would try to balance those if you can. Understand that when you ask somebody to serve as a reference, it is a lot of work on their part. So make sure to be really gracious to show appreciation of their willingness. Some letter writers will ask for working text or some summary of your background, goals, reminders of when and how you worked with them. So when I was more junior, I thought this was kind of odd. Like, why do I need to for someone to remind me when I worked with them or what class they took? But now that I've gotten a little further along and have had a lot of doc students and currently have doc students, I really do need some clear reminders of what project do you work on and what are you doing? So it's really helpful to provide that letter writer with some information. So what I typically suggest is that you send an email to the person and ask them, tell them you're going to start applying for jobs. You would greatly appreciate them to provide you a letter, and that if they are willing to do so, you will provide them a copy of your CV, a copy of your cover letter, and that if they would like, you can provide them with some additional working text or some additional review of your background goals and all of that. And then I would also let them know that when the job ad is due, and let them know that you will be checking in with them 2 weeks before and 1 week before to make sure that they have their letter in. And if you kind of put all of that up front, then it makes that person ready for kind of what's coming. And you do need to manage your letter writers because the letter writer has much less at stake in this process than you do. So just be nice, tell them from the beginning that you are going to send reminders, and don't be afraid to check in. I greatly appreciate it when the people I'm writing letters for send me that 2-week reminder, because it puts it back on my plate. Okay, so there's an article that I believe I attached it yesterday to the email. I think so. Did I, Catherine? Catherine's going to check. If not, I'll send it when I send this stuff. But the title of the article says, the CV should inform, cover letter should persuade. And so some people, Terrell says I did send it. Thank you, Terrell. So a lot of times it feels like, why do you need a cover letter? Because everything is in the CV. Well, the CV, I suggest that you read this article. It's really short, but I think it's really helpful in understanding the difference between the two. So the CV is basically a document of all the things you've done. So it's the nature of your work, the pace of your work, the volume of the work, and the people in your corner. So I can look at a CV and look at someone and feel like, wow, they were in a really high quality research lab. They were involved in this many publications. Wow, they even have 1 or 2 that they were a first author. You can see that people are taking presentations or like a student grant into a presentation, into a paper. So you can get the sense of, wow, they do have trajectory going on. You get a sense of how connected their work is or how scattered. And so that is just kind of a listing of things. But the letter is really where they're thinking about the substance of their work or your work or the contribution. So what do all those things that were listed on the CV actually mean, and why do they actually matter? It's also a place that they can get a view in your classroom to think about how you're teaching, how you think of teaching as being important. And then one of the things I think a lot of people don't think about too deeply in this whole job interview process is really this whole goal is to figure out how in the world do you fit in this place where we have a job. Hiring a new faculty member is a huge investment for a university. It is, they're assuming that you will at least be there 3 years, if not all the way up to going to tenure. They're likely going to have a lot of expenses to move you there, to give you a startup package. And so they really want to try to understand how aligned you are with who they are. And so not only just are you going to be an effective teacher or an effective productive researcher, but like, are you going to be a person that I actually want to see at the water fountain in the hall? Because you work closely with your colleagues, and so they want to understand who you are. So your cover letter should have a bit more personality in it and a bit more you in it, and a bit more description of how you fit and why you're enthusiastic about the job and why you're the best person for the job. And you can't really do that in a CV. Okay, and then Terrell reminded me to put this slide in because I didn't have it, but you have this amazing opportunity to highlight all of the extra things that you did as part of this consortium. So these should be emphasized on both your CV and the cover letter. So you've worked really hard and you have been involved in many additional activities that have enhanced your doc program in relation to the scholars who were not in the program. So make sure that people can see that. So describe the additional curriculum that you went through, describe your cross-site collaborations and all of the major area activities like the CRRP and all of those things. These are experiences that the people you will be competing against, except for one another, will not have had those experiences. So it makes you novel and it makes you stick out. And that is something that I think will help you be competitive in the job market. Okay, so now we're going to go through three quick examples. And so first of all, you're going to see mine. And so this again was in 2007. And so actually, I'm not going to open up the cover letters and CVs. I'm just going to highlight some things to look for, but I really recommend that you look at these very closely. So, and I will also caution you one other thing. When you are preparing your cover letter, do not copy anyone's model exactly. I have definitely been involved in job searches where cover letters come from people at the same institution and they look very, very similar. And while the cover letter isn't necessarily something that you plagiarize in the same sense as like a paper, it just looks kind of goofy if two people have like the same headings and formatting, and it kind of raises a red flag about your individuality and originality, and that's not something that you want to be raised during the job review process. But okay, so in 2007, I applied for the University of Pittsburgh. You can see my CV. I had 0 publications whenever I graduated, and so I included things like my major area paper, my research competency, and I think I actually included a qualifying exam because those were the things that I had. And so I was concerned about that then, but I did get a job. But I would be a bit more concerned about this today. I would probably actually caution a doc student that was under me who was applying to R1, like if they had 0 pubs, I would probably be cautioning or probably be directing them to apply for a postdoc or something like that to really get those on their CV. If you were going to a major teaching institution, I think that would be less of a concern. So in my cover letter, one of the things that I think is a decent example of is describing the studies that I've done plus what I plan to do next. And so I think it may be a good example for you to look at. How do you talk about what you want to do in the future, because you're not necessarily sure what you want to do in the future, but you need to have an idea. They need to see in the letter that you've at least thought about it. And you're not going to be held to what's in there. If I remember correctly, my cover letter has something to do about imaging and ERP, which I was excited about at the time I wrote the letter. And then I changed my mind and decided not to want to do that. So it's okay if those things aren't in there. And then you can see the job ad that I applied to at Pitt was really interested in making sure I was going to be devoted to mentoring and teaching. And so I made sure to clarify those. So, whoops, got a chat box. Okay, Jason Chow graduated in 2015 from Vanderbilt. He's now at Virginia Commonwealth. And so his CV is probably a better example of what is currently competitive to get a job at a top special ed program. So you can see he has many more publications than I did. At the point in time, he had been involved in some different grants. And so I think that shows a little more what is probably expected at this point in time. Jason's cover letter, I really like his use of headings. It shows, it just is really easy to find information in his cover letter, and he uses different bolding and italics, and he just has good sections. And so that's something that I think in the past people probably didn't think too much about it, but I do think that using good formatting like Jason has, or even maybe going even a little further like we use in grant writing, I think that could make your cover letter stand out a bit more, which anything that you can do to add like a little gold star, I think you should. So I really think you should consider using headings. He also had a good way of showing his lines of research instead of just things he's worked on. So sometimes you'll get a cover letter that just basically says, I've worked on this project, this project, this project, this project. Thank you very much. And what Jason's letter does that I think is really nice is that he doesn't talk about his experience in terms of I did study 1, study 2, or project 1, project 2. Instead, he highlights, here are the lines of research that I aim to pursue. Here's what I've done in that work, and here's where I aim to go with that work. And so I think it's just a nice, sophisticated way of presenting yourself that just shows that you really are thinking of yourself as a future researcher, not just highlighting the work of someone else that you've happened to work on. And then Katie Zimmerman, who took a job at Kansas, she graduated this year, so her stuff is from 2017. Again, I think she has a really great example of what it takes to be competitive now. And then her cover letters, she provided 2 of them. They both provide a really good amount of detail on where she plans to go next with her research. And then I think they could be good to just kind of compare them and notice the slight differentiation between what is emphasized for different jobs. So I think one of these is early childhood and one was not. And so you can see that she changes the order of what she highlights so that the things that are most relevant to the job she's applying for are what are highlighted the most in that job ad. So it is very important for you to tailor the letter to the job ad. I would also be very careful and don't submit a job ad to Kansas that says, I would love to work at Ohio State. It happens because you're kind of using the same format, but so what I think is a good strategy to do is kind of have a template letter that in all caps with yellow highlights, you say insert university here, insert faculty chair here, and then only use that letter to draft the new one for each one. And then you won't make that mistake of not catching that you referred to a person or a university that is different from where you're planning on going. So I highly encourage you to read those. I would probably read Challen Zimmerman's a little more deeply than mine since it's more relevant or more close in time, but hopefully those examples will be useful to you. I also encourage you to ask your advisor which of their recent graduates do they think would be a good person to get an example from? And feel free to email people and ask for examples. I think it's really useful to have multiple examples, and most people are very happy to share this information. Okay, a couple of little tips on getting prepared for the job interview process. This is really something that's going to be hit more on one of the next webinars. But a few things that you can start doing now as you're writing the cover letter and as you're writing getting your CV ready is to really use the university website to get to know who is there. So read the bios and look at the vitas of each person listed on your agenda and write down a few 2 or 3 sentences. I think that's supposed to be to jog your memory, hopefully not jar it. But you kind of it's really, really good to know who is there. And that's good for 2 reasons. One, it can give you something to talk about while you're actually at the interview. It can help you figure out like, oh, this person does something that, is really interesting to me. I would like to do that. You'll find there is a lot of awkward time during interviews. And if you can bring up someone's research that you're interested in, they can fill the time talking about themselves, and you then are remembered very fondly because they had a good conversation with you. And it's kind of a way for you also to get a little break from talking. So that's very helpful. But also it can help you understand what kind of university you're applying for. So if you currently are thinking you want to go to an R1 and you want to write IES grants and run projects, and then you download the bio and CV of everyone in that department, and not a single person has an active grant, that university may not be a good fit for you. And so it's a good way to think about, it's an additional kind of index of the type of program that the university is. And I think that can be really helpful because sometimes universities will talk themselves up a bit. Oh, we have tons of research going on. But then when you look at the bios, none of it's there. And so it can just be a way to triangulate information that you get in the interview. Look at the current news coverage of the university. So, what's going on? Are there speakers coming? What level of activity is happening? And then also learn some fun things about the area. So sports, culture, entertainment, etc. I think it's really important that you consider the city that you're going to. Work-life balance is something that will be very important to your mental health, and your mental health will be important to your productivity. So, you want to go somewhere that there are at least some things that you're going to be able to do to get you outside of work. So, think about those things. And these are also things that can help, again, during those downtimes during the job interview, that, you're kind of running out of things to talk about. It's the end of your second day. You've asked all your questions. And so talking about, the sports team or the culture, hikes, that type of stuff, again, makes it look like you are really interested in becoming a part of the place. And it also can make people have fonder memories of you because they realize that you're not just a robot who wants to do work, but you're actually, a potentially fun colleague. So these are some examples that Michael wrote down for his interview. So you can see Kristen down there. She's a Vanderbilt grad. She's studying conditions for successful RTI. She does database decision making, and she has a lab with these people. So he could kind of keep this list, and then it helped him remember, oh, Amy, she's that one who's doing this mathematical reasoning strategy project. I remember who that is. And I've even seen people print out faculty, like take faculty photos and move them over into a Word document so that you kind of know who people are, even though some people don't have the most up-to-date faculty photo. It can be really useful because occasionally you'll find yourself that they'll be like, oh, go to the coffee shop and Lynn Fuchs is gonna meet you. And so if you don't know what Lynn Fuchs looks like, sometimes that can lead to some awkwardness. So it's good if if you have a visual of who people are as well. Okay, so be prepared. Here are some questions that almost guaranteed you're going to be asked. So these are ones that you can start working on. So explain how a faculty position in the College of Education at this university fits with your professional goals. What are the features of this position that draw your interest? So they want to know, why do you want to come here and why did you apply to this job? Describe your research and scholarship and where you see yourself going in 3 to 5 years. And then describe how you're going to gain funding for your research. And again, here, most often the answer is use your startup fund well, use any internal grants. It's a good time to ask what grants they have to support you, and then talk about your ideas for pursuing additional funding. Expanding upon information provided in your CV, please describe your current work in the context of schools and communities, as well as your perception of the impact you have had on schools, or maybe the impact you want to, and do you plan on continuing to work with schools and communities? So universities have varying relationships with the schools around them, and they kind of want to know, are you going to play well with schools? Do you intend to go to schools? This is a good time for you to ask how many people work in schools, how easy is it to get into schools? If you are a person who wants to do large-scale research that's going to involve many, many schools, that should be a consideration in you moving to a place. Do you want to, if you're going to run very large randomized controlled trials, does it make sense to go to a university that's in a rural area that the school district only has 1,000 kids in the whole district? That might make your job challenging. So you kind of want to know, they want to know what you plan on doing with schools, and you need to ask what current interactions between schools and universities are. And then some ads will very clearly have a focus on diversity or the local community, and many of them will ask about that more specifically. So when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, there's a very large urban community of African-American students, and they wanted to know how I saw my work contributing to improving outcomes for those students, because that's a mission of the university. So those are questions you'll be asked. Okay, they'll also be asking you, we're searching for a faculty member with expertise in the design, development, and delivery of instruction in core academic areas, including the development of instructional interventions for students with disabilities. Please discuss your expertise in this area and discuss how your intervention research can inform special ed teacher prep, as well as its application for students with disabilities. So everything that's in the ad, they're probably going to ask you to reiterate in your own words how you fit and how you think your research fits. And then number 5, describe the opportunities that you've had to engage in university teaching, advising, and mentoring. And you'll need to be able to describe those. And this is the one where if you have limited university teaching, you need to highlight other ways that you have trained adults to do things. As an example, that you will be good at university teaching, even if your experience is a little bit limited. And then they always ask what questions you have for us. Make sure before you go that you prepare a very long list of questions. I think one of the most shocking things that I saw in a job interview is I was on the search committee, and we were the second meeting on the very first day, and a candidate, when we asked that person if they had any questions, indicated they did not. All of their questions had been answered at this point in time. And it really made you feel like, I don't think this person knows what she's getting into. And I also don't think um, it makes you feel like they're not really interested in your job. And so I think that would be not a very good thing to do. Okay, so I'm going to describe what your homework is from this session. So many of you are already getting ready to prepare your CV and cover letter. But even if you are not, I want you to locate a job posting that you either are aiming to apply for, or if you're not currently looking at applying, go ahead and find a job that you would apply to if you were applying on the job market. And you're going to create a draft of your CV and your cover letter. And you're going to provide these items along with the evaluation rubric that I'm going to show you on the next 2 slides. And you're going to ask your advisor to fill it out and give you written feedback. And so we are going to send an email to your advisors to let them know that this is coming. And we are not going to be asking you to turn this back into us, but we think this will be a useful way to kind of structure your interaction with your advisor. And if your advisor is a little busy, maybe this will prompt them to actually give you some written feedback. And if anybody gets totally blown off by their advisor, send me an email and I'll try to help you out. Okay, so the CV and cover letter evaluation rubric, we're just asking the advisor to reflect on a few things. So for your CV, in general, the appearance, is it well organized, easy to read? Can I locate information quickly? Like if I'm trying to figure out, do they have a teaching certificate or not? Can I find that visually fast? And we're asking faculty just to let you know, do you need to majorly revise this component, a minor revision, or no revision, it's fine. Does it include all the necessary information? Does your CV highlight your education, training, research involvement, teaching service, any awards, all of that kind of stuff? Alignment, is it appropriately aligned with the job posting? So does it emphasize what the job ad indicates needs to be emphasized? Balance, does it appropriately highlight the current level of experience and expertise, but doesn't overdo it? So including things like 8 manuscripts that are in preparation would be, I would not recommend doing that. You can't have that many things in prep that you're actually working on. Balance, does it, that's what I just said. And then NCLII does it highlight your participation here? And Terrell reminds me you have 5 minutes. And can't believe I talked a whole hour. Okay, cover letter, appearance, same thing, alignment, same thing, persuasiveness. So is it appropriately persuasive, but not, the letter is not a descriptive relisting of the CV. So it has that more depth and detail. Features and fit, or future and fit. So does it show where you're going and that you're a clear fit with the program, and then well written and aligned, or highlights NCLII. So, okay, I think that's all my spiel. So what questions do you have? And yes, I will email the PowerPoint to you.
We'll be posting this on Moodle as well.
Okay, we'll post the webinar on Moodle. Okay, any questions at all? Caitlin, I'll let you unmute yourself if you have a question.
Okay, good, because I couldn't figure out how to type it in a way that made sense. When a lot of the universities are now asking or posting that they want people to be prepared to teach both in person and online courses. So how do you make yourself sound marketable when you've never taught an online course and the only experience I have with online courses is through this consortium?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you should think about just philosophically, or how you feel that you can take what you do in person and put it in an online format that actually has a lot of interactive value added. So, I think a lot of people are concerned that online courses are non-interactive, that students are kind of working really independently. And I think a lot of people at Teacher Prep think, how can you actually train a teacher to do something with a kid if they're just like looking at slides reading things and typing on discussion boards. So I think any way that you can think about that being more interactive, I think that would be useful.
Okay.
And,
Great.
you could probably highlight that although you haven't taught one, you participated in this online curriculum, and some of the things that we did this year or over the course of your curriculum were scheduling, the times that you did the live interviews, that you had activities outside of the Moodle. Those are things that you feel like were valuable, and you might incorporate those into your classes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Chrissy asked if you're going to have audio today, and yes, you will. Terrell asked about a timeline. I would probably say that I would prefer that you complete getting feedback from your advisor by the time we meet in the November meeting so that we can debrief about that. And if you would like to bring your CV and cover letter to the November meeting, I'm happy to sit down with you and look at it, okay? And Veronica says, thank you, Veronica. Sam asks, you mentioned a startup package or something like that. Can you talk more about that? Is that always something you get, or do you need to ask for that? What does it generally entail? Okay, so I think this will be covered a little bit more depth in one of the later webinars, but in general, Research One universities give relatively large startup packages. I've seen them be anywhere between 5,000 to 20,000 to as much as 40 or 50,000 for first year people. That money is a way that the university can ensure that you are able to get started. And so let me think. So at the University of Pittsburgh, for example, whenever I went, I said, I'm going to need a computer. I need to go to a few conferences. I need some master students to work for me. I'm going to need some software. And, I need money to pay participants and order assessments. So there, they just gave me a bank account with an amount of money in it and said, there's your startup. You can use that for any of those things you decide. I've seen other places where they will more specifically outline, like, we will buy you a computer, you get 2 trips a year, you get 2 master students, you have $500 for teaching supplies. And so sometimes they'll categorize it a little bit more. So that is what's generally provided. There are universities, and typically it ends up being the ones that are not the strongest R1 universities and more teaching prep universities, but some of those places will have 0 startup funds, that they will have internal funds within the department that you can use to go to travel or maybe get some supplies for your classroom. But some of those do not provide you any additional funding for getting your research started. So in those places, I would make sure, if you're planning on doing research and they do not give you a startup package, I would want to know what opportunities do you have for applying for internal funding within the university to help you with that getting started. And I will say that if you do plan on conducting research that is larger than just a few single case design studies, you likely will need some money to do that. And so if that's what you plan to do and the search chair says we don't do startup packages, that might make it hard for you to get started successfully there. So I would raise a red flag about that. And it's also fair to ask your advisor to give you input on negotiating that startup. And I know that will be covered on a later webinar. Skip asked, how far along in the dissertation process should we be before we start applying? Basically, you just need to be far enough along that it's highly likely you will be finished by the time they need you to start your job. And so you're going to be the most competitive if during your job search, you can actually present dissertation data. That's not always the case. So it's the closer you can get to that, the better. So you may have your study designed and you're in data collection and you can present hypothesized results. If you are in that position that your dissertation isn't finished, I think it would be useful if there are other studies that you've worked on that could go in your job talk. And if you are at the job talk, which is say in January or February, and you have not even started your dissertation, you need to make a very clear case as to why you think you're actually going to be able to finish in time to start the job. Okay, other questions? Going once. Going twice. Okay, Veronica, I just see part of a question. When is it appropriate? Oh, to talk about the package. Good question. So that's a really good question. I think it is probably most appropriate to talk about it during the interview, like during the on-campus interview. So if you are, I think talking about it beforehand would be kind of obnoxious. You know, like if you call and say, hey, I'm thinking of applying, do you have a startup package or not? That isn't the right way to get started. So instead you want them to offer you an in-campus interview and go, and then at that point, that's when you can ask questions about what are the supports available. You know, I want to be a productive researcher. What are the supports available at this university to do that? Is that something that would be included in the startup package, or is that something that would be included with, you know, I would need to pursue internal grants? But I wouldn't really talk about the details, like the specific dollar amount or what's covered, until after you've been offered the position. And I think it's only once you have a job offer that you start the negotiation process where you say, you know, $5,000 really isn't what I think I'm going to need to get started. Let's talk about what I think might be necessary. I feel like I could become a radio DJ. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so thank you very much for participating. Good luck as you get started in your 4th year. If you have questions that you weren't able to type in or you think of after we get off the call, feel free to send those to me by email. We'll make sure you get this in your rubric, and if you will, we'll also send your advisors the email. But if you will, make sure that they review and give you input on a cover letter and CV before the November meeting, and then we'll touch base about that there. And otherwise, have a great start of your semester, and thank you again for all your hard work. I've heard a lot of great things from people who attended the OSEP meeting, that they are very, very impressed with you guys. So you guys are making us look good, and we appreciate that. So have a great start of your semester, and I will see all of you in November in Austin. Okay, thanks, everybody.